You ever look at old photos and think, that can't be real? Like, someone's messing with me. Because if I showed you pictures of Tehran in the 1970s, you'd swear it was Paris or Rome, maybe Madrid on a good day. Cafés lining the boulevards, cinema marquees glowing at night, women in miniskirts and fitted dresses walking past bookshops like it was the most normal thing in the world. Because it was. Young people in jeans arguing about Sartre on university campuses. Western pop music drifting out of restaurant doors, mixing with Persian melodies in this beautiful, chaotic soundtrack. Professors debating philosophy. Women driving cars, running hospital wards, filling office buildings. And if you're sitting there thinking, wait, we're talking about Iran? Yeah, we are. So here's the question that should keep you up at night. How does a country go from that, from one of the most cosmopolitan, culturally alive societies in the Middle East, to one of the most rigid theocracies on the planet? In barely a decade. The answer is one of those stories where every single person involved thought they were doing the right thing. And somehow, it all went catastrophically wrong. Buckle up, because the money trail on this one is wilder than you think. Now, to understand how Tehran became this glittering showcase of modernity, you need to understand one man, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Educated in Switzerland, tailored suits, big dreams, bigger ego. The guy looked at Iran and basically said, we're going to speedrun the Industrial Revolution. And honestly, on paper, his plan wasn't terrible. During the 1960s, his government rolled out this massive package of reforms. They called it the White Revolution. Which sounds dramatic, but it wasn't a revolution at all. It was a top-down makeover, a national renovation project funded by one very convenient resource: oil. Sweet, beautiful, incredibly lucrative oil. And the money was flowing. Imagine turning on a faucet and instead of water, just cash. Endless cash. The Shah took those petrodollars and went on a shopping spree that would make a lottery winner blush. Highways, airports, hospitals, factories, universities popping up like coffee shops in Brooklyn. Land that used to belong to a handful of wealthy families redistributed to millions of peasants. New schools in villages that had never seen a textbook. Women got the right to vote. They flooded into classrooms, into professions, into public life. Foreign observers were tripping over themselves, writing glowing reports. Look at Iran, a beacon of progress, the model for the modern Muslim world. The middle class was expanding. Tehran was booming. Skyscrapers going up. International hotels opening their doors. The city felt electric. And here's where the pattern kicks in, the one we see over and over and over again throughout history. The pattern that, spoiler alert, nobody ever recognizes while it's happening. When money pours in fast, really fast, it doesn't lift everyone equally. It never does. Not once. Not in any country. Not in any century. Because while North Tehran was getting its fancy shopping centers and modern apartment blocks, the southern neighborhoods were swelling with migrants from the countryside. Millions of people who'd heard about the boom packed up their lives and arrived in the capital expecting opportunity. What they found instead was overcrowded housing, scarce jobs, and prices climbing faster than their wages ever could. Picture this. You leave your village because someone told you the city has everything. You arrive, and the city has everything, just not for you. That gap between the glossy brochure version of modernization and the lived reality, that gap is where revolutions are born, every single time. And yet every single time, the people in charge act completely shocked when it happens. But the economic inequality wasn't even the biggest problem. Not really. See, the Shah had this vision of a modern, Western-aligned Iran. Great, fine. Except he wanted to build it without one rather important ingredient: political freedom. Iran technically had a parliament, it technically had elections, and those elections technically allowed political competition, in the same way that a rigged carnival game technically allows you to win the giant stuffed bear. You can play, you're just not going to win. The real decisions? Those happened in the palace, the Shah and his inner circle. Full stop. Political parties operated under surveillance so tight they could barely breathe. Criticize the government openly? That's a bold strategy. Let's see how it works out. It did not work out. Because behind the modernization project stood an organization that became the stuff of nightmares. SAVAK, the Shah's intelligence agency. Their job description was simple: monitor everyone, trust no one, and make sure dissent stayed very, very quiet. And for a while, it worked. The surface stayed calm, the economy kept growing, the foreign press kept praising, the Shah kept building. But underneath, the pressure was building like steam in a sealed pipe. Here's what the Shah fundamentally misunderstood. And honestly, it's the same thing every ruler with too much oil money misunderstands. You can't modernize a country's economy while strangling its politics. You can't hand people university educations and then tell them they're not allowed to have opinions. You can't open the cultural doors to the entire world and then act surprised when people start asking uncomfortable questions. It's like giving someone a library card but arresting them for reading. Those university students the Shah was so proud of, they started reading a lot. European political philosophy, Latin American revolutionary theory, and they started talking about democracy, about inequality, about why a country swimming in oil wealth still had neighborhoods where families couldn't afford rent. Nationalist intellectuals started asking why Iran's foreign policy seemed to be written in Washington, why the country's most important ally was the United States, why modernization always seemed to mean westernization, as if Persian civilization, one of the oldest and most sophisticated on Earth, needed to copy someone else's homework. But the opposition that would ultimately matter most, it came from a direction that almost nobody in the Shah's circle took seriously: the mosques. Within Iran's Shiite clergy, a growing number of religious leaders watched the country's transformation with something beyond concern. It was alarm, deep, existential alarm. Because from their perspective, this wasn't just about politics or economics. This was about identity, the soul of the nation. Modernization wasn't simply changing how Iranians worked or dressed. It was changing what they believed, what they valued, who they were. And for religious communities that had anchored Iranian identity for centuries, that felt like annihilation. One cleric in particular saw this moment with terrifying clarity: Ruhollah Khomeini. And here's what made him dangerous. Not dangerous in the way SAVAK understood danger, not a guy with weapons or an army. Dangerous because he had a message, and the message was simple enough for anyone to understand. From exile, because of course the Shah had kicked him out of the country, which, historically speaking, is almost always a mistake. Seriously, exiling your most vocal critic is like throwing a match out the window and being surprised when the grass catches fire. From exile, Khomeini sent recordings, cassette tapes, his sermons smuggled back into Iran and passed hand to hand through bazaars, through mosques, through living rooms. And his message cut straight through everything. The Shah has sold your country. He's abandoned your faith. He's traded your identity for Western approval. Now, was the opposition unified? Absolutely not. That's the thing nobody tells you about revolutions. They're not neat. They're not organized. The people who want moderate political reform, they're standing next to the people who want radical social upheaval, who are standing next to the people who want to preserve thousand-year-old traditions. The only thing connecting them is that they all agree the current situation is broken. And that kind of coalition, held together by nothing but shared anger, it's powerful enough to tear down a government. But what comes after? That's where the real tragedy begins. Because the people who are best at destroying systems are almost never the same people who should be building new ones. Iran in the late 1970s was this impossible contradiction wrapped in expensive packaging. From the outside, gleaming, full universities, growing industries, a cosmopolitan capital that could hold its own against any city in the world. From the inside, fracturing along every possible line, rich and poor, secular and religious, traditional and modern, loyal and furious. And the Shah? the Shah still thought he was in control. They always do. He looked at Tehran's illuminated avenues and saw success. He looked at the oil revenues pouring in and saw security. He looked at his American allies and saw protection. What he didn't see, what he refused to see, was that the very engine of his modernization project was generating its own destruction. Every new university created students who questioned his authority. Every economic reform that bypassed the poor created more resentment. Every cultural shift toward the West gave Khomeini another sermon point. Every arrest by SAVAK created not one enemy, but 10. The money kept flowing, the buildings kept rising, the contradictions kept deepening. And you know what's wild? This pattern, rapid modernization funded by resource wealth, political control disguised as stability, inequality masked by GDP growth, a ruler too isolated to hear the rumbling. This pattern has played out so many times in history, it should have its own Wikipedia category. The finances look spectacular right up until the moment they don't. The regime looks unshakable right up until it shakes apart. By the end of the 1970s, Iran still wore its modern face for the cameras. But behind that face, years of accumulated tension had already transformed the political atmosphere into something volatile, something irreversible. A nation of contradictions, ancient pride and imported modernity, oil wealth and grinding poverty, cultural openness and political suffocation, was drifting toward a moment that would reshape not just one country, but the entire geopolitical balance of the Middle East. And the cruelest part, the signs were everywhere. Everywhere! The students shouting on campuses, the sermons circulating on cassette tapes, the neighborhoods where resentment had hardened into something unbreakable. The clergy who'd been dismissed as relics suddenly commanding the loyalty of millions. Every warning sign you could ask for was flashing red. And the people in charge looked right at them and saw nothing. Because that's what always happens. The ones sitting at the top of a system built on contradictions, they're always the last to notice the cracks. Always. Whether it's the Roman Senate or the French aristocracy or a Shah in a palace surrounded by yes men, the view from the top is the worst view in the house. Iran had one foot on the threshold of revolution, and almost nobody in power had any idea what was coming. The money kept flowing, the buildings kept going up, and beneath it all, an entire civilization was about to turn itself inside out. Same pattern, different century. Same blindness, same ending. And people wonder why this channel is called Money Never Learns. It's not money that never learns. It's us. So, you look at this story and you think, well, that was Iran. That was the 1970s. Ancient history. Could never happen again. Not here, not now. Right? Right. If that question made you even slightly uncomfortable, good. That means you're paying attention, which already puts you ahead of the Shah, his advisors, and about 90% of the International Press Corps in 1978. Most people will scroll past this and go right back to not noticing the cracks. If you'd rather be the one who sees them coming, subscribe button's right there.